All right, see, I got a heart for the camera door. So I'll show the dog. Hey, man. Hello. You a good boy.
So cute.
Okay, we have 20 people in the room now, so I would propose let's just get started. I actually have already started the recording, and we will continue to let people in. Welcome, everyone, to the Terra.do chat with Zoe Samuel at Startup Ventures. I will give a quick introduction for Zoe shortly. For everyone else, if you can come on video, we would definitely love to see your face throughout. This is a very interactive session. Definitely would love to see your face if you're in a place that you can share perfect. You can start your video and let us see you. A quick introduction about myself. My name is Angela. I'm a Terra.do ambassador. I actually did a program 2 years ago and really changed my life and have been staying in touch with the community ever since. I think that's also what brought you here today. I'm a sustainability consultant, and I have also hosting an event during SF Climate Week. If you're going to be in San Francisco, definitely hit me up. Would love to connect with you. But today, super excited to have Zoe on the call. Zoe Samuel is a venture partner at Starshot Capital. She previously worked at Google, where she co-created Alphabet's largest internal grassroots climate solution communities, the Anthropocene, now over 4,000 strong. Anthropocene supports Google's climate projects such as Project Sunroof, Anthropocene, and many more, as well as providing educational and career resources to Googlers seeking to contribute to climate solutions. Zoe also led circularity and climate programs and engagement for GTech, one of the larger divisions at Google, working towards a world without waste. Fun fact, Zoe once milked over 250 cows, knows the scores over 50 musicals, and regularly makes world-class roast potatoes. With that, over to you, Zoe.
Thank you. I forgot that I left the fun fact on. So thank you for having me. Yeah, it'd be lovely if people could pop their cameras on, because otherwise I feel slightly like I'm talking to a blank wall. And despite having been in theatre for many years, I was never a performer. I was a producer and a writer, and so don't put me on a stage. My standard for what should be on a stage is like people who are professionally charismatic, and you know, you look at them and they turn heads going down the street, which I try very hard not to do, which is easy. Thank you for having me. So I'm a venture partner at Starshot Capital, and we're going to do mostly a Q&A and chat format today, partly because there was a lot of traveling going on, so I don't have slides for you all, but also because I know a lot of the Terra community is folks who are looking to you know, find work in climate, or you already have work in climate, but you are not currently maybe making your full living from it, or you're sort of curious about how to further your climate career. So I'm also the vice chair of the board of an organization, a nonprofit called Work on Climate, which is the world's largest climate tech community, and obviously very collaborative with Terra on a number of things. And so it'd be delightful to see any of you there, but I'm not here to poach anybody because we have quite different offerings. And so I've known the Terra team since they got started. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Starshot Capital, what it is that we do, and then talk a little bit about the climate investment landscape and then climate careers. And just for, by a show of hands, if you're currently working in climate, and if you don't want to put your camera on, or you can't put your camera on, just say something in the chat. Who here is currently in a full-time climate job? Okay, I see 1, 2 hands, and I see no one in the chat. So, and who here would like to be like working on climate as your main thing? So is that pretty much everybody? Okay, cool. Always useful for me. So I used to do a thing at Google called we have a third in the chat that's full time now. So I used to do a thing at Google called Coffee and Climate, where we would help people figure out their path to a full-time job in climate. And I quite like that we'll sort of take a masterclass format somewhat and talk to some of you about your path and where might be a good place to go. And that will hopefully help the rest of you for finding your way forward. I've also put my LinkedIn in the chat. All right, so Starshot Capital. Oh, that's awesome, Matty Carbon. That's great. So we are a venture capital fund, and we are investing in early stage climate companies. Can you all hear the fact that my dog is chewing up something just at my feet, or is that he's not? Okay, great. Because it's annoying me, but I didn't want it to annoy all of you. Okay, so we're a venture fund. We invest in three major climate verticals. That's the built environment, industry, and agriculture. And the reason for that being that the other one, you consider the other sort of main areas where the emissions come from, which is mobility and energy. We consider those to be on a path where we see the way forward, and they're very well invested by wonderful people like Lower Carbon Capital and Breakthrough Energy Ventures and so on. And something that's good to know about Starshot Capital is we are not what they call concessionary capital. That is, we are as cold-hearted capitalist as anyone at Sequoia or Kleiner Perkins or anywhere like that. We are not here to this is not philanthropy. This is, if we meet you as a very early stage startup, we expect you to be able to 100x from your current value. And we believe that there should be no green premium. None of our companies should depend on government policy, which turns out to have been a very smart approach, recent events notwithstanding. And you know, because when you think of the life of a venture fund, you raise a fund, you deploy it, and then you get your money back, hopefully over the 10 years or possibly 12 with an extension. And that's 3 elections, you know, assuming you're in a place where elections occur. And you cannot assume that all 3 elections are going to go your way, whatever your way is, although of course you should probably keep an open mind, certainly outside the US anyway, about which is your way. So I'm going to say one more thing also, which is that any opinions I express today are mine and not those of Starshot Capital officially. I should have said that at the beginning. So those 3 areas that we're investing in, we've made 12 investments so far. There's 4 in agriculture, there's some in industry. So we have a copper mining company that's helping make copper mines more effective. And then, so the agriculture ones, we have, for example, a company called Ruminate, which is making a supplement for a feed additive for cows that eliminates 95% of enteric methane, which those of you who've got that drawdown pie chart in your head of the emission sources will know that that's about 4% of emissions, which is bigger than the whole airline industry by quite a lot. So we are focused on companies that can eliminate a gigaton cumulatively of emissions between here and 2050, so 40 million tons a year, which is, if you're not Google, a massive amount. You know, obviously across a portfolio ultimately of 16 or so companies, which is where we'll be by the time we've deployed the whole fund. You know, in theory, 16 gigatons is a meaningful percentage of the carbon budget, certainly for one entity to be involved in. And so my role at the company is that I do a little bit of everything, because when you are a small fund, on your first fund, then you wear many hats. So I do portfolio support. That's helping the companies that we've invested in with whatever they need. And obviously these are startups. They often don't have very large teams, or they're hiring, or they need office space, or they need customer introductions, or the CEO's got some sort of thing going on, and he needs to suddenly have somewhere to stay in London. It could be anything, and you have to keep a very open mind about what that might look like. And I have to say, my many years in theatre prepared me for that, because there is no being on this earth. As an ex-Googler, I suppose I would say the second most spoiled person on this planet is a Googler, and the most spoiled person on this planet is a theatre actor. So once you've produced theatre, I think you can look after Silicon Valley startups. And just to give you a little more about my background. So as I said, I was in entertainment. And the reason I want to tell this story is because some of you here are going to be, you know, you're not in a full-time climate job, and it's possible that it has crossed your mind that you are not currently qualified for a full-time climate job, or that you'd have trouble proving that you are. And I was in the same shoes a couple of years ago, and look where I am. So it's all worked out very well. So I was writing and producing, and then Google slid into my DMs on LinkedIn. And anyone who's ever got any familiarity with the entertainment industry knows very well that LinkedIn is absolutely useless if you are in that industry. So the fact that I happened to look at it the same week that Google DM'd me is pure serendipity. Some sort of, I don't know, climate god looking over me happened to say you should take a look. And they did not get in touch with me for a climate thing, because that was not my thing. I'd just been very worried about it my whole life, because you know, I grew up with a dad who mentioned it when I was about 5, and I got anxious, and the anxiety never went away. I used to have nightmares about it. And so I'm like, why does Google want to talk to me? This is so weird. I don't want to talk to them. They're tech. They're very boring. They're very corporate. Of course, they see themselves as very fun because they're comparing themselves to McKinsey. Um, and um, and so but I took the view you should always take the meeting. So I go off to Google, and some of you may know Google is famous for something called 20% time. This is 8 hours a week of your job that you're allowed to spend doing not your main job. And usually it's really 120% time. I, for some reason, arrived at Google thinking this was a compulsory thing. You have to have a 20% time job. And given my concern about the climate and the fact that you won't be surprised to hear Google has very good internal search tools, I found the climate people there. And so my actual job, by the way, just for those who might be interested, I was working on the Google Assistant and what is now Gemini. And so I've seen the sort of the Lambda as it was at the time. So my job was to get my first assignment involving Gemini was to get it to break its rules. So get it to be racist or inappropriate or agree to do crime or tell me to unalive myself and so on. And I could always get it to do that. So I don't know how much it's changed since then, but just so you know. Anyway, so I got involved with this climate group, Anthropocene, which did already exist, but it turned out that the role of theatre producer and writer is very similar to being the head of a climate community. And so they made me a co-leader of it in my 5th week at Google. And we grew what had been a somewhat inactive listserv to a 4,500 person very active community, weekly talks, one-on-one meetings, huge amount of resources sort of for people who wanted to climate in 5 minutes a week versus people who were trying to make it their full-time job. And when we talk about sunroof and agricultural monitoring, which was formerly known as Anthropocene, and I put those links in the chat as well. These were projects that we supported through what we called climate working groups, which was essentially an internal incubator. So people at Google, we would say, well, we've all got 20% time. We don't have to ask permission. And we're certainly not going to ask forgiveness because it's the right thing to do. So let's just take Google's resources and put them towards climate. And so Sunroof now, it did exist, but it was languishing in the doldrums with a very small amount of engineer allocation towards it. And so we basically were able to take these projects and get them to the point that they were investable by senior leadership. And so Sunroof now has its own team and it's 15 people, and it's most of the solar installations, residential solar installations in the US are associated with a call to the Sunroof API within the previous 6 months. So it's like absolutely amazing how much impact it's had. And that's a very good example of how, we all get a lot of pressure to cycle more and don't eat beef and all these personal choices. And then you realize that you can touch one project like that. And if you look at the GHG impact, we're talking about potentially 300 million tons a year. That is just the size of a decent sized country. And it's so much bigger than anything I could ever do on my own. And I think that's the really important takeaway is that, for those of us who are not protest people or not policy people and not professors, professional is the way to go with climate. And it's amazing how much impact you have. I like to say anyone who touched Sunroof in any way can spend the rest of their life in a plane that is made of plastic straws and powered by coal and spends most of its time strafing rainforests, and they will still be on the right side of this issue by a lot. So I'm not going to start eating beef again, but I could, and that's very important. So basically, I turned out I was very good at this, and the Google powers that be said, "Oh, look, you're good at this. You should do it as a full-time job." Moved me into a full-time sustainability job. I uproot my life, moved to California, get a beautiful dog, as you see, and then they laid me off. And so that was the big layoff 2 years ago that you might remember seeing in the news. And I highly recommend, if you ever have to be laid off from Google, because they give you a lot of money to go away. And in entertainment, if you get paid for the last month you've already worked, that's not bad. And your heart is broken 25 times a year on stuff that you care about a lot more than a job at Google. It is likely to be the thing you care about. So as much as I did care about my climate community, and that community came to my rescue, 1,200 people reached out in the first week. And it was phenomenal. I got this tsunami of kindness, and I have had professional stuff fall apart as an early career person. And when the emails don't come and the phone doesn't ring, It's terrifying and it's really depressing. So it's easy for me to say, you know, getting laid off by Google was actually great for me, but because of that community, it was actually great for me. So I got involved with Starshot Capital, who I knew through the Work on Climate community. Work on Climate was actually co-founded by other members of my Anthropocene group. So there was a sort of Venn diagram of people who already know each other. Now I'm going to just quickly say, if you are not subscribed to something called, if you want to be working in climate and you're not subscribed to something called CTVC, which is Climate Tech VC, I'm going to put the link, then you should be. This is a newsletter that has all the deals that are being done in climate in any given week. And I'm sure you get 10,000 newsletters, but like actually read this one. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the climate investing landscape and this part of climate belonging to professionals as opposed to belonging to policy protest and professors. And yeah, I alliterated it because I used to write songs for a living. So the professionals, the climate investing landscape. Ben Gomes, the SVP of Sustainability at Google, who was a SVP of Search for many years. So not a man who needs to have a job. Like he got hired at Google in 1998. He's doing this because he cares. He said of climate that the way he feels about what is happening within the climate space and innovation and startups and investment is how it felt to be in the internet in the mid to late 90s. And I call that the good hockey stick. It's the hockey stick that's chasing the bad hockey stick of emissions and all of that. There is a massive pivot point that has occurred in the last 5 years. Actually, the last, really since 2016, I think a lot of people realize the federal government's not going to do this in the US. There is no cavalry. A lot of other countries in Europe especially realize that the US is not going to save us from ourselves, which we're kind of used to them doing. And as you can hear, I'm not originally from the US. And so there has been this like massive waking up, and unfortunately it's terrible to say this, but every time some sort of, you know, half of Australia burns down or half of Pakistan is flooded, or like Dubai has a cloudburst where they suddenly realize there's 8 feet of water in the middle of the desert. A bunch of people go, oh, this is real. And they start doing something about it. And I think it's exciting to see the energy that's coming into it. There's a huge amount of money, but that money is deployed in a way that is perhaps a little weird and a little misallocated. And so there are sort of strange breaks in the pipeline. Like that reason we're focused on early stage stuff at Starshot is that these early stage companies, deals under 5 million are actually still quite not nearly as common as they should be. And under 5 million is where obviously most startups fail, because it's the thing where you can't quit your main job to go and do your startup because you haven't got, you know, $3 or $5 million to get out of the garage. Nice thing about addressing that part of it is that's also where diverse founders tend to fall out as well the most, because it's hardest for them to get that initial like, oh, here's $500,000 or $1 million to like take a chance on you, because they don't have track record. And of course, diverse founders get invested on track record, not on potential. I see everyone here pretty much probably fits into a category where you've had some experience on that. So there's some heads nodding. So there is this amazing change happening of people coming into it. And so that's in the startup world. And then there's the fact that there is now going to be a climate component to every job. And so if you are let's say you're an accountant and you're not familiar with all the incentives and tax situations around your client's solar on their house, or, you know, depending on what country or what municipality they live in. Now, if you're not familiar with that, okay, fine, you're not a climate accountant. If you are familiar with it, you're a climate accountant. 15 years from now, if you don't know those things, you're a bad accountant. Like, it's not that you're not a climate accountant, so you just suck. And let's say you're in procurement and you work at Pepsi and you need to buy thousands and millions of potatoes every year because you're trying to make millions and millions of chips or things that aren't really food, but they were a potato once, or things that are delicious. You know, you need to know about drought, you need to know about risk, you need to know about supply chains and whether or not there's going to be a thirst wave and the river's going to be too low for shipping things. And so this goes beyond just your sort of nice to have net zero type stuff that unfortunately is often the poor relation at these major corporations. So if you feel like, oh, I'm not a climate person because I'm not working in a full-time climate job, you could be a climate person. There's probably some component of your existing job that you could actually make into a climate role. And it'd be wise to do so because those are becoming increasingly essential. Because most of what corporations really, really hate, especially big ones, is they hate risk that is unnecessary. They always want to manage risk, and climate makes the system wobblier. The climate crisis makes the system wobble, and it makes more risk, and it makes risk of things happening that you cannot foresee. And if you can be the person who's accounting for that because you know what you're talking about, that is just going to be an essential skill of the next generation. If you think about the climate fight, it will be won or lost over the careers of the people in this room. So the fact that you're here and you're getting involved means you are in a position to materially affect the outcome. And you're probably people of great education and ambition, and therefore you're very high leverage. People like you being involved in a sunroof, or people like you making the Pepsi supply chain 1% greener every year, really does change the outcome. So with all of that said, that's kind of where we're at. That's my journey. And I'm going to open it up for Q&A because I'd love to hear a little bit, especially I'd love to hear questions from you all about kind of how I can, what concrete steps you can take to move in the direction that you're trying to move. So, all right, drop your questions in the chat. I think Angela's going to moderate for us, so I won't have to do that. I don't like stage managing my own event if I can possibly avoid it. So.
Yeah, I think given we haven't had any questions earlier, if you just want to raise your hand, we'll just do a first come, first serve.
Great. Always good.
Yeah, you can elaborate on your questions too to make it more.
It would be great if people can pop them in the chat just for accessibility. It's nice to have it spoken and written. But if that's too difficult, then we shall, perhaps Angela will be able to write it into the chat while you're speaking. So go ahead.
I have a question. Thanks for sharing your background. It's so interesting to hear the trajectory of different things you've done. I'm curious about the transition moments between, I mean, theater to Google, and then as well from moving from Google then to impact investing, like the horizontal or like the transferable skills that like kind of took you to those places.
Yes. So the single most transferable skill is being told no a lot and not being in any way deterred by this. Or you obviously, like, it still hurts, obviously it's horrible to say no or to hear no, but it's you just have to soldier on. And in theatre you hear that so often, and often, you know, you hear it because they're like, we're looking for a play for our season that's like exactly this, and then 20 people submit exactly this, and so it's very personal when you get rejected, because it's like, oh, you're not even the best version of you. And that's just like, it's not like, oh, they went another way because they needed someone who had something else. No, they just didn't want you. And then the other thing is in investing, raising a fund, the other transferable skill was shamelessly asking for money, which have, you know, especially for the women and people of color in this room, especially. But you know what, my husband is a tall, handsome white man with working class parents, and he's also very uncomfortable about asking for money and asking for what he's worth. So for anyone here who's not comfortable with money, you've got to get over it. You've got to become comfortable with it. And I know it's very unfair to say that, where you've got to be able to negotiate for yourselves in a culture that's going to punish you for doing that. But you've got to practice. Anytime you're going in for a difficult financial conversation, you're going to ask for investment in your thing. You're going to ask for a raise. You're going to ask for a job that you, on paper, are only 70% qualified for. Practice that conversation, not with your best friend, because they'll tell you everything's wonderful. Practice it with someone who's like one click further removed, who's going to tell you where you're sucking. And practice it until your hands don't shake and your voice doesn't move, you know, your voice doesn't modulate, and you practice it until you sound like you expect the answer to be a yes, not in an entitled, horrible way, but just in a, I know I've got this kind of a way. Going back to my own transitions, I give Jeremy, the founding partner, Jeremy Brewer, who's the founding managing partner of Starshot, I give him a lot of credit for seeing that I could do it. He observed that the most transferable skill that I had actually was my network. And those 1,200 people that reached out, you know, a lot of them were still at Google, a lot of them were ex-Googlers who'd started their own companies. And again, from theatre, if you do not have a big network, you don't work. So being very open-minded about what your skill is that's immediately transferable is always good. The other thing is, you might have all noticed by this point that I'm hilarious. And that's about the question of having a skill that, like, that is unusual in the space that you're going into. So, you know, on Krypton, Superman is just some dude, but on Earth, he's Superman. And and so the question is, do you have a skill like I can make anything funny? And that's surprisingly useful when you're running a climate community because you can hold events that are the best hour of somebody's week when their week is like doing JavaScript all week. You're like, of course it's the best hour of that week. And like I know how to give a good event and how to make other people look funny and look good at those events. So think about like what are the skills that you might have that are special in another space where actually in the space you're in, they're just quite boring and quite regular. And they're like way funnier people than me. Like I'm not suggesting that I could ever be like in the cast of SNL or I'm not a performer, but I am on paper very, very funny. So like there are skills like that. And I think tolerance for risk helps in making these pivots, but I will say that part of my motivation in going to Google was that my mother-in-law was showing signs of dementia, which turned out that she had Alzheimer's. And so having two of us working in the arts and having an income that looks like this was a really sub-ideal situation. So again, like I don't think anyone should be judged if they can't take a full-time job in climate because it involves a pay cut at this point, or it involves like taking a big risk or going to an early stage startup. And you've got mortgages, you've got kids, you've got whatever it is that you need to look out for. And so your tolerance for risk is a very personal thing. Being laid off, like my tolerance for risk at that point was like, oh, it has to be really high again for a while because I need to find something that's going to keep the lights on. But I think it's okay to say like, oh, I'm not ready for a large pivot, and find a way to like do climate in a maybe less all-consuming way. That was a long-winded answer, wasn't it? Who's next?
Amazing. So we have Sajida, who's been patiently waiting, and Sangram, you're next.
Hi, Zoe. I really appreciate the context and the color that you shared. I'm a product leader who's worked in non-climate jobs. Right now, I'm in transition, and I'm really eager to make the switch to climate tech, including built energy and ag tech.
Yeah.
So, really quick suggestion that I'd like from you is here's what I'm doing. I'm reaching out to a variety of founders across different companies, looking at LinkedIn, looking at, what they're doing, and trying to do that through referrals, hoping to connect with people also in Climate Tech Week. I'm curious, is there anything else that you suggest as I'm trying to accelerate this? Because I'm really chomping at the bit to get started and do something in climate.
So thank you for the question. So I think totally understand where you're at. I think, being a product leader is a great thing in climate because the one thing I would say in entertainment was more people fail in that space because they're all show and no biz than any other reason. And green biz has a lot of the same problem. And so there's a lot of people in climate who desperately need people like you who know how to, excuse my language, know how to make shit happen. Because there's a lot of dreamers and not so many doers. Hello, good dog. Yes, you're very nice. And so the biggest cluster of founders that I know of is the Work on Climate Founders channel, which has 3,500 founders in it.
Okay.
And so that's a good place to meet people. So for those who are not familiar, there are climate weeks around the country. The biggest one is San Francisco, which is actually next week. So if you're in the Bay Area, come. And like look up events. The next biggest, you won't be surprised to hear, is New York. However, there, I don't want to again be like, I imagine a lot of us here are not from the Bay Area or in the Bay Area, and like contrary to what a lot of Silicon Valley believes, it's not the only place in the world that matters. So there's one in Seattle, there's one in DC, there's one in London. Like look up if there's a climate week, it might be called Climate Action Week. And there might be something like that in your city. And obviously there's no substitute for being in person from time to time. So that is a smart move to be doing. And sorry, Sajid, you're already doing that, but for those who are not familiar with that. But I would say there are the CTVC list, newsletter that I mentioned is a good place to get a sense of who the founders are who are getting funded. And obviously if they get funded, they're hiring. Because that's one of the main reasons they would be getting funding. But getting familiar with the sort of landscape of funding and like who are the accelerators? Like maybe if you were in the UK, volunteer to get involved with something called Tech Nation, which has a climate accelerator. And if you're one of those volunteers, you're going to meet 20 of the best founders in the country. And I'm sure Angela's going to very kindly send out this afterwards, but like the great accelerators here, there's Activate, there's Elemental, there's Greentown Labs. Everyone's writing it down, but I'm sure you're all going to get a lovely email afterwards.
Thank you.
And so watching what companies are coming through the accelerators, maybe get involved as a volunteer for one of those accelerators. I hate to say again, especially to a room full of people who are not like upper middle class white dudes, you do free work, that's what get you where you're going. So, you know, respect your time, like don't let someone take advantage of you. You are the best judge of that. But I think getting involved in those places where companies are like in that step between the lab and the market, especially for a product guy, is going to be a great place to be meeting them. But I think the Work on Climate Founders channel is like by far the biggest conglomeration of them. And then the CTVC site, it's the main site's called Sightline Climate. Like you will get a good sense of like who the funds are that are investing in that, who the companies are, who the founders are that are like considered to be the most likely to, who are the prom kings and queens and non-binary monarchs. So czars, I don't know. And so you know, making sure that you're kind of hanging out in those spaces as much as possible. And obviously, if you're not based in the Bay, coming to some of those virtual events and then being like, it is absolutely shocking to me how much being good at following up and actually bothering to reach out to people and knowing how to send a decent, like I can tell when it's ChatGPT. I'm a spectacularly good writer. Like send a real freaking email, be in touch with people like a human. And like actually follow up and say do what you'll say you'll do, you'll be ahead of the curve. So hopefully helpful.
Great. Thank you so much.
Amazing. We have Sangram next. Would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes. Actually, I work for a climate tech startup that works towards uh, making sure that we can report quickly enough. So if there is a listed
Sorry,
company,
you're a little quiet, and I'm very old and deaf, so I'm going to ask you to. What does your
okay.
startup do?
So my startup's name is Bharat Carbon,
Okay.
bharatcarbon.earth. So what we work towards is making sure that any ESG reporting is done very quickly enough with AI
Yeah.
assistance so that we can guide clients in the right way and they
Cool.
can develop reports in seconds instead of months and minutes.
Awesome.
So,
What's the
so
question?
that
Okay.
so the question is, right now we are pre-revenue and pre-seed.
Yep.
We're still trying to figure out which product is working the best and will be much more beneficial other than the ESG reporting and sustainability reporting. So what kind of advice would you give to early stage startups which are pre-revenue and pre-seed?
Sounds to me like you should be in an accelerator. Like that's exactly what, because it will give you a bit of prestige, and it will give you a bit of guidance. Gosh, if only there were a product leader on this call that you could like have a nice chat with. You could also possibly set yourself up with one of the conversations. So there's again, over at Work on Climate, there's a whole bunch of experts that you could sign up for office hours with who probably include people who know about this sort of thing. But I think the big climate accelerators are probably going to be the right place. Or you know, if you have a different approach, I suppose there's probably other categories that you could fit in. It might not need to be a climate accelerator, but like, yeah, you should be in a lab or something where you have like a 10-week thing where you're going to get a bunch of founders who've and mentors who've done it 100 times, and are going to help you bridge that gap, because yeah, being pre-revenue is very, very stressful. So again, those ones that I mentioned before, Activate, Greentown Labs, etc., like that sounds like a happy place for you. And also you'll make a network with other founders who are going to be your best allies, even the ones who ostensibly are a competitor. Like there's space for a lot of people to succeed in each part of this. So I would say a competitor is just a collaborator that you haven't made a deal with yet. So all right, the next question.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna go to a question in the chat first before Manjari. So
I haven't got the
ask...
chat open because everyone is so beautiful. I'm watching you all.
Oh, it's totally fine. So I'm gonna ask a question for Karthik because he cannot turn his audio on. He said, I'm an engineer working in sustainability with nonprofits for the past 5 years without formal education in sustainability. Moving forward, I want to pursue my master's in sustainability. I'm currently in a dilemma of applying to universities in the US, but I'm unaware of the job situation of the sustainability domain in the US. So his question is, how does the current political landscape affect the above? And what countries would be best to do my master's in sustainability? And is a master's in sustainability even necessary? If not, what else?
Just quick question, Kartik, what country are you in right now? If you can pop it in the chat. I'm going to start answering in a generic way, and then if you, oh, India. Okay, cool. Gosh, so the visa situation coming from India to the US is a pickle right now. So I think it is important to remember, and it would, our American-born friends, would, I'm sure everyone on this call knows, but there's others maybe do well to remember America is not the world. And there's a lot happening in other places. And there's a lot happening in India. Like, I think people who look and sound like me have tended to expect solutions to come from people who at least sound like me. We're not actually, Britain's not on the sharp end of climate change. Like, sea level rise is the only sort of really big problem for us. So, there's a lot of amazing things happening in India. I'm struggling off the top of my head to immediately remember some of the, okay, Work on Climate has a geo organization, like where we groups by location, and I would say go find other folks who are doing like cool startups and stuff in India. Also, God bless you for working at a nonprofit as an engineer for a long time, because you could probably make a lot more money not doing that. I haven't lit degree. Like, it's so if anyone's sitting here going, oh my gosh, I don't have the right qualifications, no, I don't either. I think having a master's in sustainability will open certain doors more as time goes on. Federal policy in the US is not going to, I'll stay on that for a moment. Okay, that again, you're not going to get like multiple elections go a certain way in a row. And let's assume, for the sake of argument, the US is going to have a completely normal election 4 years from now. Like, we could get a complete whipsaw in the other direction. So you can't make decisions too much based on that. It is worth noting the US is a federal system. What's happening in California or what's happening in the States is incredibly exciting, and as goes California, so goes the country. So like, don't give up on America. It's still an extremely, innovative place where an enormous amount of energy is happening. Like, Texas deployed more solar and wind last year than any other state. Iowa has a senator who is nuts about a lot of things, but he's fully pro-wind because there's a lot of money in it. And the lobbyists for these industries are starting to have enough money to be able to actually get things done. Like, you might have seen a permitting, the number of ranchers that showed up who were like full-on cowboys who showed up saying, we love solar, at a recent hearing in the Texas state government. Because there was some sort of silly anti-clean energy law that was being considered, and all these dudes showed up who were like as red Republican as it gets, and they're like, solar is the only reason I still have my family ranch. So this transition is not going to be stopped in the US or anywhere else by misguided policy over the next several years. There is also, you may notice, for example, a company called Magrathea Metals has made a very smart pivot, where they used to be like, green magnesium, it's magnesium, but it's green. And now they're like, national security, we need to have plenty of magnesium. So, critical minerals and energy independence and things like that are things that everybody can get on board with, irrespective of their politics. I don't want to tell someone who is Indian, who might not be received the way I am as an immigrant in the US right now, that you're going to have a totally amazing time over the next several years in the US if you are on a visa. Having said that, I can't, I don't think the big universities are going to just completely stop doing sustainability degrees. I think most of the time people are going to be fine, and it's just that this is a weird time to be in the US. Having said that, loads of stuff is happening in Europe, loads of stuff is happening in China. I mean, speaking of places where you might feel like it's a bit of a weird time to be an immigrant. So you don't have to come to the US, you don't have to have a degree in sustainability. I think there's an awful lot of engineering opportunity. Like, someone who's an engineer who's good at it, which I'm assuming you're great, doesn't need any further degree, unless what you want is something that it's like, if you're someone who's wants to be in management, or you want to be in something that having an engineering history doesn't necessarily say, hey, I'm that guy. It can be worth having a degree that shows a different part of you. But I have a bachelor's, and I do not have a master's. I do not have an MBA, anything like that. And for my personal preference is to learn by doing. But I do accept that that can be a very different thing in certain types of career, where credentialism can work very well for you. And American culture is incredibly credentialist, and they really do respond very well to like, oh, this person went to one of the following 12 universities. They must be amazing. So I'm afraid to say, very annoying answer. It is somewhat of a judgment call. I think the main reason to come to the US and to go to do one of those degrees right now is that the networking is going to be phenomenal. And so I would weigh that very, very heavily in favor. Hope that helps clarify your thinking at least.
And to add a bit more, if you do a search on the top 10 sustainability programs, I think I checked the list maybe a year or two ago, and there were only 2 programs that made the list from the US, and the rest were actually all over the world. So definitely do your research before deciding. We're going to go to Manjari next.
Hello.
Hello, hi. It's very informative talk. Thank you. So I have a question, like a couple of things you said to join an accelerator. How do you really get into an accelerator? Like I have some ideas of some startups, etc., but I kind of like some, not a startup, but like, yeah, some ideas that, science and health. But, and you want to probably have some co-founders or, instead of going alone.
Yeah.
How
So
do
you want to
you-
get you want to be off the drawing board and on the way.
Yes.
So I think it's very hard to be a one-man band or a one-person band.
Exactly, yeah.
Because you have
I
no
get that.
deadline and you have like no one, you feel like no one cares if I fail, and that's like a completely horrible experience.
No one to brainstorm also, right?
会放，然后有一个密码，有一个 QR，然后我送你 QR，你就 QR code。
Becky, we're hearing.
Can you mute yourself?
Am I muting yourself? Thank you. So I do recommend, not going it alone. Certainly, even if it's just being part of like a community, where you can have people who care. So if you're that early, you're a little early for the accelerators because they typically want to see like a business plan and they want you to kind of know what you're going for. So I would say there are probably, even if you can't come to San Francisco Climate Week, it is next week. I would say look at the events. There's going to be like a list of 300 events.
I'm attending there. And
Great.
actually, the second question,
So I think
how do I meet all of you there?
I think that they'll probably, you want to be looking for events that are like founder oriented. And I think you want to be the best people to speak to when you're trying to like do your next career move. Speaking to someone who's like 7 steps ahead can be actually a really bad idea. Everyone's like, I want a powerful mentor. I want to, unless that person can write you a massive check, in which case, great. But generally speaking to someone who's like 1 to 2 steps ahead of you is actually much better because they made that step under similar circumstances to what you're going to make it. Someone who's 20 years ahead, their advice may not actually apply. So I think what you need to be doing is finding founders who are like, maybe they've done a pre-seed round, so they've raised a couple $100,000. They're still doing it part-time, but they've like found their idea and they can talk about what that process was of finding the thing. This is the problem I'm going to solve. This is the thing that really bugs me about the world, and I need to make it better. And they can talk about that process. So I'd be looking for like, where are early to mid-stage founders giving? Where are they speaking? Where are they to be found in the big climate communities like the My Climate Journey community or the Work on Climate, or within Terra? I bet that the Terra Do community has loads of founders who are, and you should be looking for ones who are like actually reasonably early. And then some mid-stage people, because you want to know that you're talking to people who did actually survive that difficult early stage. And like, look, maybe it takes a year to figure out what your thing is. Unless Santa Claus really comes through this year, climate as a problem is not going away. So like, you're not going to miss the boat. Like that we are obviously on a clock as far as solving the problem, but there is plenty of this problem to go around. So don't freak out and think, oh God, if I haven't incorporated and made my plan by July, I've completely failed myself. So yeah, it's okay to be patient and to build your networks, and to like, what you really need is like, if everyone's familiar with something called 90, it's called the Climate Innovation Hub. It has offices in several major cities around the US. That is a really good place for potential founders to go hang out, and also for potential early startup hires to go hang out. They have loads of events, and it's just like a good place to kind of be having a coffee and run into people. So 90, highly recommend. 90, because that's a gigaton.
We're gonna go to Shubham next from the chat, if you can ask your question. Shubham, are you there?
Would you mind? So I can't find your question, Shubham, in the chat. So if you could read it or speak it, that would be great. Ah, here it is. Okay. Shubham says, I'm curious to understand how fundraising is managed in the climate sector, especially considering that many climate solutions are in the research or early development stages and often lack proven long-term sustainability or impact. Given these challenges, how do investors and organizations justify funding? He's interested also in how to explore a role in a career or role in climate-focused fundraising and venture capital. Where do you begin? All right. Can you all hear my printer that has now started printing in the back corner of this office? No, great. Okay. So Shubham, thanks for your question. It is a huge, anytime you're raising money for a thing that has not been done before is really, really hard. That is for sure. And so things that help is having a co-founder who's exited a bunch of other businesses before, or somebody having a team that has track record, because obviously if the topic doesn't have track record, maybe the team does. And it's useful if, you know, most of us investors are very unimaginative and stupid, and you need to be able to say something, oh, it's like Uber, but for solar. Like if you have some kind of like way of making it dumb enough for us to understand, that's always helpful. And again, I keep banging on about CTVC. There is a page there called Capital Stack. It has a list of funds that are investing in climate. Those are the people who've managed to raise money for climate and who are giving it to to founders. There's hundreds of them, and in the collaborative list that we keep at Starshot Capital of funds that we're aware of and might do business with, or like co-invest in things together, there's 450. So like there is money, especially if what you need is a couple million because you're doing an early stage thing, or even a couple $100,000 because you're doing like a really early stage thing. The money, you know, someone's sort of solved the problem as far as your immediate needs are likely to be concerned. From the point of view of an investor raising those funds, my experience is that the sweet spot for a climate investor is someone who either they know investing very well or they care a lot about climate and legacy. And most of the people who are LPs in funds are men of a certain age who are starting to think about their legacy. It's possible that they've made a lot of money. Possibly they came by that money in a not particularly thrilling way, like, you know, they did something that wasn't, like, it might have been fun, but they, you know, they were at McKinsey, like they were a very successful dentist and they ran a series, like you know, they're not like, they feel good about it, they worked hard, they're very successful, but it's not like, oh, my amazing legacy to the world is, you know, that I consulted on such and such a thing for a big company. Like, okay. And so they're maybe looking for something with a little bit more spark and a little bit more pizzazz, and they're also looking at their kids and their grandkids and thinking, what world am I leaving you? And so that's the kind of ones who are thinking about legacy, thinking about climate. Maybe they also, the sweet spot can also be people who are philanthropists. So people, you know, I talked about all those policy protest professors, and climate has belonged to them. Climate in the mind of an investor has very often belonged to philanthropy. And if you can persuade them, oh, no, you can make money doing this. Sometimes they feel weird about that because it's like they don't want to make money doing it because it's good, and therefore how can that be? But they do fundamentally want to have a lot of impact, and they thought philanthropy was it. And when they see that they can have a lot more impact by actually just doing what they've always done and the thing they're already brilliant at, which is money, they love that. We do have one LP, one limited partner investor in the fund, who is a straight up climate denier. They're just fully, they don't believe in the problem, and they just fully believe in money, and that's fine, whatever gets you there. You know, we said to them, like, do you think we're straight up doing fraud? And they're like, look, we believe that the US grid needs upgrading. So, you know, investing in solid state transformers is good. We believe that farmers spend too much money on fertilizer, and that there's runoff into the waterways is bad. So they can believe in the individual problems that collectively make up climate. And so if they're a sophisticated investor, they can see that over the next 20 years, EVs and solar and reducing nitrogen-based fertilizers and that sort of thing are all massive opportunities. And even if they don't in aggregate see the big problem, they see the opportunity. As far as getting into VC yourself, I would say start following all those funds on the capital stack list, like start looking for the ones that you have an expertise. My experience of VC is that you need to come in with two things. Like I am fairly sure that I could not have gotten hired at like Sequoia. I think you have to be like a more typical finance background, like you went to Harvard and then you went to BlackRock and then you did an MBA, and then Sequoia makes you an associate and pays you $5, and you do that for 5 years, and then eventually you get to make loads of money. I think you need two things. I think you need either, well, you need a skill and a network. So your skill might be that you're unbelievably good domain expert, you're a chemical engineer, you're a mechanical engineer, you've got like a really serious qualification. I'm very good at UX, and I'm very good at assessing teams. The other thing you need is a network. Your network might be founders, it might be investors. Like I came in with a very long list of people who have an awful lot of money, and I found it a lot easier to raise millions for climate than I found it to raise tens of thousands for theatre. Because there's a lot of people for whom 10 grand is what they have down the back of the couch, and it's not going to change their life if it goes well, and theatre is for fun, whereas this is serious. So your network is going to be, maybe your network is at universities and it's professors and you have very good access to like what the technology is doing. Maybe your network is that like my networking includes not just investors, but also a massive number of founders and also people who want to pivot into climate, because I've had so many conversations now where I get to meet amazing people who are like, oh, I am but a humble software engineer and I have no skills relevant to the climate. And it's like, yes, you do. So sometimes you find those people and you get to help them switch into what is their dream job, and that's always nice. The third thing that you really do ultimately need to get a long way in VC is you've got to be able to raise money. And that just means having a list of people. You might be like, oh no, I don't know 12 billionaires. If you know, they say if you want to be a Broadway producer, what you need is like 12 rich friends and good taste. Which is truer than I wish it was. And I think in VC you probably need, depends how rich your rich friends are, but it doesn't have to be just some rich guy. It can also be that you know people at pension funds, you know people at university endowments, you know people at places like Neuberger Berman, like these big funds that manage large amounts of money, for whom $5 or $10 million to go into a fund is like not that much. The other thing that you probably know if you're in tech is Henry's, high earner, not rich yet. That's people who are your immediate contemporaries who like work at software companies and stuff, and they make a lot of money, and they couldn't write a $5 million check now. They couldn't even write a $1 million check now, but they will be able to in 10 years. And that's your network. And it's a terrible way to think about your friends, but it's true. So I guess you just have to sort of deal with the fact that that's an asset. So if you have worked somewhere like Cisco or wherever, like you've worked at big tech, you've worked at, it doesn't even have to be like the fan companies, it can be anywhere that people are kind of on a good trajectory to do stuff. Maybe you've worked at McKinsey or Bain or like a bank or something like that. Those people are all future LPs. And so they kind of count as part of your network. An LP, again, a limited partner for those unfamiliar, someone who invests in a fund.
Great. I think that also answered Yash's question, which is I'm looking to break into climate investing team. So we're going to actually go to Tak. We have a question, time for one more. So Tak has her hand raised.
Great.
Hi, Zoe.
Yes.
So when I pivoted into climate, that was about 2 years ago, everybody asked me, like, so Tak, what are you interested in? So that, so I suddenly realized that my background is in market intelligence. I did a lot of business industry analysis and stuff like that. So before that, it was like, you can be a generalist and be successful. When it came to climate is not one thing. So what I quickly found out was I really have to focus. But it was very, very difficult for me to do it. Now, so I took sort of like a long approach. I looked at everything, and then I focused on a couple of things, like building decarb was one. And I focused on it and then realized that this may not be where I want to be. It was much more established. It was more about execution. And then now I'm at a place where I'm focusing on adaptation, because that's on everybody's mind, but also on energy, on the grid resilient side of things. But it feels like, so at the one point, I feel like this is great to be focused, but at the same time, I feel like, am I missing out? By focus too much on a few things, and it's hard to do it in
I'm very
climate.
familiar with Yeah.
So,
All right. So how you're trying
tell
to
me
figure out how to
how,
thread this needle
yeah,
that could be
tell me,
threaded many ways.
how you've done it. Yeah, that's my
Okay.
question.
Well, I went to a VC where I get to focus on more than one thing. So yeah, that's a real problem, and because like a lot of people within climate, like I'm an agriculture person, or I'm like even within agriculture, I'm a food waste person, or like I'm specifically like a before the farm gate food waste person, or like I'm a restaurants food waste. Like they'll sort of slice it more and more until you get down to really specialized things. And some people that's just like not how your mind works, and you can hop from thing to thing, especially like you said, marketing, like that's a and like business development type stuff, like that's a skill that's like very transferable and moves more comfortably from thing to thing. So I think if you're not going to pitch yourself as like, I'm a deep domain person and I'm like, I am the solar person and I am the queen of the sun and I know all about that. That's fine. Pitch yourself. I can market anything, and then you're just going to have to go heavy on the fact that like, hey, here is my former I've taken this company and I've helped transform it by my incredible marketing plan, and you're going to have to show why that skill set that you brought to bear there was applicable to this other space. Like there are people who I think it's like, if you're a chemical engineer and your thing is green hydrogen, you're going to need to go from one hydrogen company to another. If you could use that to pivot into you could monkey branch. You can go say, oh, and I'm going to do geothermal because that's a little bit, or I'm going to go from, manufacturing hydrogen to geologic hydrogen to geothermal to carbon capture. So I would say try and find an adjacent field where you'll have an immediate relevant skill set. So it's like you did built environment stuff and now you're interested in adaptation. Well, great, that there's a lot of adaptation to be done in the way that we've, like, not just the way we're building our houses, but insurance and relevant things like that. So I think that the best thing to do is find something that's like close, where it's going to be clear how your experience will translate directly. It is difficult because there is a lack of imagination where people are like, oh, no, I'm looking for someone who's exactly these 25 things. But again, to what I was saying earlier about applying for a thing that you're on paper only 70% qualified for, but you're actually 100% qualified for, just take a swing at if it's exactly the right thing, and like work your network and find someone who can make an introduction for you and make the case for you. But in the meantime, like, really think about how your skills are transferable and find those fields that are like one click over from the previous experience that you have, so that they have as little imagination required as possible to see you as the person that they've been looking for.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. We're actually at time, so thank you for staying until the end. This session is recorded and it will be uploaded on the Terra.do YouTube channel for you to review. And also Zoe has popped in her LinkedIn and also all the other resources, and also recommended the Work on Climate Slack if you want to continue the conversation with like-minded like-minded members in the community globally. So very thank you for all of your time. And with that, we're done with the session and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, everyone. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for the very thoughtful questions.
Thank you.